Good morning, and welcome to the regular Jump webinar. This week, we've given Howard some time off from his duties as our regular host.
It's not time off, Adam. We've upgraded. It's not time.
I'm honoured to be given the opportunity to channel my inner Howard. So, on a recent Jump webinar, 3 senior HR professionals explicitly told our audience of over 70 recruiters that finding partners to help them attract a more diverse workforce was their #1 priority. Before we can authentically talk about our clients and about diversity, talk to our clients about diversity, we need to look closer to home. So this is the first in a series of 4 webinars on the topic of diversity, equity and inclusion. And as well as our usual Jump participants, Paul, Dave and Paul, I'm delighted to introduce our 2 guests for this week, both with formidable experience in this field and in our sector. First, I'd like to introduce you to Joanne Lockwood. Joanne is the founder and CEO of See Change Happen, a diversity, inclusion and belonging practice providing support to organisations and businesses. Joanne previously spent time in the forces and in private banking before running her own very successful IT business. She employed at its peak 25 people. She famously took part in the Channel 4 documentary, The Making of Me, and according to her website, her mantra is smile, engage and educate. And she passionately believes that people are people, and no matter who they are, they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Welcome, Joanne. Our next guest is Jackie Handy. Jackie describes herself as being on a mission to ensure that everyone feels safe, valued and understood at work. Jackie spent 15 years as a recruiter and now works through her company, Runway Global, not Runaway Global, as Jackie made sure I knew, supporting organisations to embed diversity, equality and inclusion into their leadership culture. Her TEDx talk, The Inclusive Nature of Inclusion, has been viewed over 25,000 times. And she's the author of the book, The Little Book of Belonging, which is there behind her. Yeah, you're both very welcome. And I hope that you enjoy being in discussion with us.
Thank you,
Helen. So, let's get going with the first question. So why is it important that recruitment leaders include diversity, equity and inclusion as a key pillar of their strategy? Jackie, do you want to go first?
By all means, yeah. So look, the world's changing, isn't it? The world is changing. And I think more and more people, organizations, they want to partner with those who are seen to be proactive in this space. So in really not just embracing change, but acting on processes of change. I think COVID, we know COVID has created, I think, a whole host of opportunities in terms of the way we work, where we work from, enhanced flexible working and so on. And I think, now is the time that recruitment leaders in particular can really optimize those opportunities and really lead the way. Right, lead the way. The key thing with recruiters, of course, and recruitment leaders is they have the potential to be such trailblazers, and they're real focal figures in industry. And it's almost like where recruitment leads, others will follow. And so I think there's a huge opportunity. That's a huge why. And I think, from an internal perspective, the recruitment is notoriously a sector that has high staff turnover, ebbs and flows in performance. And of course, we all know that a greater sense of belonging within an organization is absolutely going to enhance retention figures, engagement figures, and of course, productivity and profitability figures. I think I'll leave it there, really. But there's a whole number of reasons why.
Lovely, Jackie. Great start to the discussion. Joanne, do you have something you want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Why is the first question? Why does it matter? Why do you, as a recruitment organisation, what is it going to, what difference is it going to make to you? What is the purpose of the change? And I think often we embark on these changes. It's trendy. Everybody's doing DE&I. Oh, I've got to do it. I've got to put out a Black Lives Matter statement. I've got to speak out against violence against women and girls. I've got to put my Rainbow Pride logo up in June because everybody else is. And I think the why is going past that Me Too. It's going past that performative, everybody's doing it, I should, it's trendy. It may be contemporary. I would not say it's trendy. It's of the moment. COVID, as Jackie pointed out, has sparked a lot of focus on well-being, employee well-being, people well-being. Yes, same storm, different boat. Everybody has had a unique experience around working from home, working remotely. Some people are working harder than they've ever worked before, and some people are working a challenge to find work. People who were once privileged with high-performing businesses suddenly found themselves struggling and out of work. So we know there's all these inequities in society. It's brought home focus on the social inequities around race, around black people, disproportionately affected by COVID. And we thought it was down to blood type and body and chromosomes, but it turns out it's down to the way that people socialise and live. So the structural inequities exist in society. So from when we think about D&I, it's around making sure we understand those inequities, making sure we understand the social construct of race, social construct of gender, and putting steps in place to avoid and mitigate those microaggressions that occur in everyday life, and being more than just performative. So we know now it's not enough to be not racist. It's about being anti-racist, understanding what being anti-racist means, anti-homophobic, anti-sexist. Because if you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing, effectively, as far as I'm concerned. You're allowing it to pass on your watch. And I read a stat the other day about the World Economic Forum saying that we will only achieve gender equality in the UK and Western Europe by the year 2071. 2071, that's 50 odd years.
That's a shocking statistic.
And it's worse in the Middle East and the Far East. They took about 150, 160 years before gender equality, even if it ever happens. So to me, it's shocking. You know, how can we half that? 2046, even 2046 sounds, that's not, how can we make that 2030? So unless each and every organisation is focused on bringing that societal change, that business change around not only gender gap, ethnicity gap, disability gap, LGBT gap, whatever those gaps are, if we don't focus on it, we're talking 50 years. And I think we'd all be horrified if that was to propagate for that. That's the why, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm honestly astonished by that statistic. But then I remember hearing somebody say once in genuine belief that, well, you know, racism's not as bad in the UK as it is in America. You know, they're the ones who've really got the problem. So why do we need to do anything about it? And it's kind of like, that's the sort of attitudes.
But then you look at stop and search. You look at the cases of black people dying in custody from the police, the number of black people that are arrested compared with white people. And yes, we've also got to look at the disadvantage of young white men now who are also falling into that trap. So yes, to say that racism doesn't exist doesn't mean to say it's just not a lived experience of many black people have. You know, speak to the people
exactly.
being affected.
Yeah, and the idea that it's not as bad here means we don't need to do anything about it. It's just, I find it's astonishing. So it was interesting. Dave, would you like to add?
Say, it's interesting you mentioned about 2071, which is awful. When you think about climate change and how high that is up on the agenda, it's almost like we've got a human climate change, which isn't yet high enough on the agenda. So, what's your thinking about that? How do we make it into human climate change so that it's something that captures the hearts and minds of everybody?
Here's something crass that's in the news at the moment. 3 billionaires, white privileged billionaires. What's their focus? It's who can get into space first.
Yeah.
You think of all the challenges we have as a civilization, as a society, sustainability, climate change, inequities in society, and their priority is to, well, invest or waste, you choose, billions into getting into space. Where are they standing up for the inequities in society? What are they proactively doing? So Yeah, I mean,
I-
that would be the comment I would use there.
I think also, we talk about the inequality and the length of time it will take and where people's attention is. I think, to be clear, I think people are fundamentally good, right? I think what it is that we talked about bubbles really prior to recording, and we don't mean COVID bubbles, we mean our own like-minded bubbles. And it's that whole kind of your opinions and viewpoints become the average of the people you spend the most time with. When you're in the environment of people who are like you, who maybe think like you, process like you, have similar values, and perhaps even look similar, you're in similar cohorts of society, then those are the only viewpoints you're ever going to get. And that sort of acts in a sort of confirmatory way, doesn't it, to your own existing opinions. So, I think, and I don't believe Joe meant it in such a way that people were kind of ignorant to it. I don't believe that. I think what it is, it's that life just seems to go at such a pace. There seems to be so many priorities. To your point, Dave, DE&I is starting to become a priority, but it's not quite caught up with the climate change priority yet. And I think it's conversations like this one which start the ball rolling and move us from that kind of just becoming aware of what it all is to actually starting to facilitate change.
I think that's a really good point, and I think I think you talk about the pace and the change, Jackie, and I think for me, when we look at recruitment, and I'd be interested to get your view on this, when we talk about recruitment, we frequently talk about the labour force in an organisation. We don't talk about the recruitment process and how the recruitment process changes and influences the shape of a workforce. So we're almost in it slightly the wrong way around. There's roughly 38,000 agencies in the UK, of which 90% have got less than 10 people in the business. So the SME agency has actually got a really crucial part to play in fixing this process. So coming back to the pace and the priorities, what do you think agency owners should be doing more of quicker? And then my second question to Joanna is, so going back to the why should agencies be doing something different at speed to speed up the change process?
Oh, you're going to be in trouble with me, Mr. Sharp, stealing my questions and going in a different order to my original plan.
I'm in trouble already.
You are. On you
Bring
go.
back Howard.
If Heather will let me, I'll still answer that question. So here's the thing: we tend to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and for whatever reason, we focus on it often in that order. And I think firstly we should reverse that. So if we focus, and this is specifically in answer to your question about the SME recruiter, and by the way, I think any recruiter, any organization in fact, can be looking at it this way and should be looking at it this way. When you focus on getting the environment right, the day-to-day behaviors, the day-to-day language that is used in an organization, diversity will follow, because your practices, your policies, your brand, everything you stand for will appeal to passive and active people wanting to come into your business. Goes back to my point about organizations more and more wanting to partner with those that are seen to being proactive in this area. I think what happens in recruitment companies, and as with many companies, to be fair, is there's a bit of we've always done it this way and it works. And we're sometimes blind to the culture that is at play in a recruitment organization. Think about what we reward, for instance. We reward fast turnarounds, hitting KPIs, making placements quickly. We're not necessarily rewarding diversity. We're not rewarding inclusive and equitable practice. We're not rewarding people doing the right thing, dare I say, when someone is or isn't watching. We still have in many recruitment organizations this kind of environment of, there's a lot of banter. It gets us through the day without realizing that so much of that banter may cross a line. It kind of comes back to that. We don't know what we don't know, but we're fearful of saying we don't know. We're fearful of showing that weakness in such a high pressure, high volume, speedy, fast environment. And so I think, you know, it goes beyond the question really, but I think firstly, focus on the environment that you have, because talking to recruitment leaders, your values will often just be on a poster, but the culture, that goes back to the day-to-day language and behavior that is being exhibited from everyone in the organization, but ultimately led from the leadership of that organization. So focusing on that first, I think, and I'll talk more about it in a bit, but I want Joanne to have an opportunity to answer her question, but clearly passionate about it. There's a lot that can be done. And I think that introspection and that openness to vulnerability as leadership teams in recruitment organizations is a great place to start.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Jackie. And Paul, I know you're itching to say something. You had something you wanted to say earlier, so we'll let Joanne answer Paul's second question, and then Paul, I'll come to you. Joanne.
Yeah, thank you. When I'm talking to not just recruitment leaders, but many people in the SME and more the medium-sized enterprise, not knowing where to start is always something that people say. How do I start? How do I start? And I always say, you've asked that question, you've started. By being sentient to the fact you need to start means you're already on that journey. And I always encourage people to be authentic. So let's talk specifically about agency recruiters. If we think about some of the why, it makes business sense because your clients, your corporate clients, are now going to demand this. They'll want to see evidence. In the same way they want to see evidence of BS, what was it, 9001, 27,001 environmental, all these badges you've had to collect as a business. 76,005, the standard around inclusion, diversity, IIP, whatever standard you're looking at. These are going to be things that you're going to have to evidence to your clients. So in order to be authentic, you need to first start with looking at yourself. And as Jackie said, culture is extremely important. Start with culture, clean your own tank, get rid of the toxicity, look at your metrics, look at how you're rewarding people, look at how you're focusing people. Diversity hiring, going to market is the end of the process, not the beginning. You cannot hire your way out into a diverse environment. You cannot hire your way into being less toxic. What you end up doing is killing the fish you're bringing in. So you've got to be really, really focused on cleaning that tank, rooting out those nasty smells, setting up reward structures that recognize the power of diversity and that best practice. I think as Jackie said, what gets measured gets done. What gets rewarded gets done. If you're rewarding bad behavior, you'll get bad behavior. So it's really looking at that. And think about the inequities you're creating. And if you've got a bro culture, a lad culture, then think about how that impacts some of the other people within the organisation. The language you use, are you calling each other mate and bro and buddy?
Nice.
How does that impact women in that environment? I often hear agencies say to me, it's really hard to find great black lawyers who are specialists in this particular discipline. I say, well, black-led legal firms don't find trouble finding black lawyers for their. They know where to fish. They know where those ponds are. So you need to look at yourselves and say, actually, maybe our mix of consultants we have, the mix of people who source, aren't as diverse and broad as we need to in order to go into that market. And I also encourage agencies to think at some point you're going to have to invest in this. This is not business as usual. This is investment. You may well have to walk away from bad business. You may well need to recruit different specialists. You may well need to say, actually, no, we're not going to we're not going to place that role because of the way the client speaks, the way the client describes. But it's every agency's nirvana is to be seen as a trusted consultant advisor, not to just be a bum placer in just filling recs. So how can you position yourself as an advisor on DE&i? How can you set yourself apart? webinars like this, you could host your own webinars. You could create yourself as thought leaders, publish blogs, bulletins, advise. So when a client comes to you saying, I want another person just like the last, high heels, short skirt, and great makeup, please. That's the person we want. You say, well, actually, have you read our blogs? Have you started watching our video series? So you start educating people subtly rather than having the big confrontational discussion. How can you lead your customers down that path? I think that's how you can start, is to get your house in order and think about how you could be seen as a trusted advisor, not just a bum filler, if you like.
That honestly has made me smile. It's just triggered a memory for me of many years ago in a high street recruitment agency. The branch manager closing the branch on a Monday morning to do makeup lessons with us all to make sure that we looked presentable to people coming in. And I mean, it would be horrifying today, wouldn't it? It was pretty horrifying then. Yeah. Paul, can I come to you, Mr. Jacobs?
Thank you so much. Look, I mean, I think the guys have said so many profound things that I completely agree with. And
the guys
have said.
The girls said anything profound?
There you go. You see, what can I say? I was
Easily done.
Easily done. Okay, but I think that the point here is that, you know, I've been in, as Paul Sharp has said many times, I've been in the industry for many years now, and I remember very vividly back in the 70s and 80s the level of discrimination across so many areas that, you know, as you pointed out, there are some amusing moments, Heather, when you think back to those days, but actually, you know, so many awful things that were very evident then. And the truth is that I think if people consider that governments should lead the way, they're really rather deluded, as was said earlier. You know, they do very little. If you want to take any control of what's going on around you, then take control of your own vessel. And I think this is a very important subject, more than important. It's profoundly important. And I think people that lead businesses, the leaders of the businesses that listen here, are really very much going to have to make decisions about commercial and moral imperatives. In other words, I think it's about using your conscience above making profit. Joanne made a point very well that, you know, there are tough decisions to make. Do you want to chase bad money? Are you prepared to put up with some of the demands or the comments that clients or indeed candidates make in your direction? And I think there are some difficult decisions, but actually, although they're difficult from maybe the perspective of profit, the reality is they're pretty easy decisions, because if you are somebody that has a decent level of a moral compass, making those decisions is pretty straightforward. And I think, you know, we talk a lot about, and we have over the last few months, about how difficult it is to attract people at the moment to your business, to find the right people, to find the people that match your culture. And deciding on what your culture should be, again, should be a relatively straightforward decision. When you make those decisions, and it is for you a clear decision, you know what's right, you know what's wrong, and you demonstrate that culture in every which way. And I hark back to the points made earlier, very good points about making certain that your bonus plans, your remuneration plans are not just around making placements, getting contractors or temps out, but have other areas attached to them. I could argue actually pretty strongly you shouldn't need to reward people financially for doing the right thing, to be blunt. But if that is the world we live in, then we ought to acknowledge that. But when you make those decisions about what kind of culture you wish to have in your business, you'll find it relatively easy to attract the right kind of people to your organization. And in the end, you know, turning your back on what goes on around you is a decision. You are giving people permission to behave in a certain way. Doing nothing is a decision, and it's not a good decision. So I think making your statement, making your decision on how your business should look, populating your business with the people that reflect society, is a decision you can take. And there are decisions to take on what business you want and what business you do not want. And frankly, for me, and this is just a personal point, it's got nothing to do with business, I would rather make no money than make money in areas that make me deeply uncomfortable. But those are decisions that are, I think, for the people listening to this to make. I think they're easy decisions. If you do the right thing, you'll build a brilliant business regardless. And I think those are the things that people have to really take on board.
May I
Please
come
do.
back? Is that
Yeah.
all right? And I love what you just said there, Paul. You know, because it just makes sense, doesn't it? A couple of things to kind of pull from that. Not in disagreement, in support of, you know, the whole culture piece that you mentioned there, and people that match your culture. I think, again, it goes back to, do you really know what that culture currently is? And do you want more of the same? You know, we often hear this culture fit versus culture add or culture build. Is that not what we need? So is there a bigger piece actually around actually changing the whole system and how we bring people into our business, the whole criteria? Now, I'm not saying that certain skills and qualifications are no longer relevant, but I'm thinking, you know, when you look at a recruitment consultant, for example, you know, what really are the skills? What really are the qualities that you're looking for? Often qualifications, you know, I will say this here, I'm saying it out loud, no A levels, didn't go to university, don't judge me, but we do anyway. Yet I had a really successful recruitment career. And you know, actually my background is one where, gosh, I was helping my parents on their market stall as a youngster. And, you know, I went overseas as a holiday rep and traveled and had to sell and those kind of things. So there are certain qualities and certain ethics that come into people. The rest we can train. And there it comes down to Joanne's point again. It's not just an investment into diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's an investment into people generally, rather than this, let's get someone with experience because then we can just let them get on with it. We must be investing in the building up of the people that we bring in. And if we're not prepared to do that, then let's not bring them in, because we're setting them up to fail or putting them into a dirty tank, as Joe mentioned. And the just briefly as well, on the other couple of points, so you mentioned you shouldn't have to reward people for doing the right thing, and yes, I would agree with you. I think in many ways we've got to start somewhere, and that's an interesting place to start to get people focused on the right thing. It doesn't have to be monetary reward, but even just a, you know, well done, you did the right thing, because to keep the education piece going. But I wonder about, you know, how many recruitment agencies have anything explicit in their terms of business, perhaps, that say, you know, that have a diversity statement within that make reference to the fact that certain things will not be tolerated. Is that a little bit harsh? But, you know, we work in this way and this is what we expect as part of our terms of working with you and you with us. You know, nobody says we can't do things differently in that way to make things easier for the recruiter as you start to embed this. And just my final thing, and that is about, you know, understanding and doing the right thing, Paul. Great point indeed. I think it takes us back to the earlier point of not everyone actually understands what the right thing always is. And not picking on you, Paul, your little comment there about guys, you know, these are subtle things that happen that we just forget in the moment. And so it does go back to Joe's point again. You know, this isn't a one and done. This is a long-term investment for organizations to take on board, especially in a leading field such as recruitment.
Joanne, I think you had something.
Yeah, I've just been putting a little light heart on this, where maybe you can start playing buzzword bingo. You know, then hit the ground running, aka I want someone who's just like the last person. Gut feel. All my biases are driving my opinions here. You know, it's and we've got to start questioning when we hear these tropes and mantras and sayings coming out. What do we really mean by that? And my favourite buzzword, well, my least favourite buzzword is we always hire the best person for the job. It's a meritocracy. We all know the meritocracy is BS. It's bullshit. We invent the meritocracy to meet our expectations based on our own biases of the ideal person. We don't, as the point Jackie most eloquently made around hiring for potential. We're hiring off of a historical document. We're hiring for CV. The CV is a sales prospectus. It's a marketing document. And you know, often it's two people lying to each other, and who managed to persuade the other person they're lying the least, you know, around the whole hiring process. So by really looking at what someone's capability is, not just what they've done in the past. Because probably the reason they're leaving is they're not succeeding where they are. So you want to take someone that's not succeeding where they are and put them into your business where they won't succeed again. And the old adage is you get promoted to the edge of your competence, and then you don't go any further, because people often rise to the top and then take one step too many. And do you really want to take that risk? So look at people's potential, not what they've done, not time served, not who they've worked for. Yes, if a degree is important because they're a doctor, they've got a speciality, they need the degree. Yes, that's great. But how many times do you see must have a degree? And is it in what topic? It doesn't matter. You can have a degree in geology or early years education, or whatever it may be. And we're just saying, have you got a degree? And I think sometimes that we're excluding people from minority backgrounds, people who've come from different communities, where there's no expectation of that qualification, and we're immediately writing off everybody. So start looking at mentoring schemes, investing in the community, nurturing talent. Don't just trawl out in the market as an agency. You can look at the colleges, look at the schools, and seek candidates for those.
Thank you, Joe. Paul, I would just, before I come to you, I would just say, in support of what you said about rewarding the right behaviours and whether that's appropriate or not, I think sometimes actually it's taking one step back from that, in that sometimes we're actually actively rewarding the wrong behaviours by the way in which we set up some reward schemes. So even looking at what are we encouraging people to do by the way in which we reward them, that actually we don't want those behaviours. So actually, I think there's a whole step back from that. Paul,
I just want to, really very much in support of what Joe was just saying. I think one of the topics, and we just made reference to it, is finding people for our businesses at a time when we have to open up our minds to the kind of individuals that would succeed in our industry. And there is this attitude that's been prevalent for donkey's years, which is, I only want somebody with recruitment experience. Well, to use Joe's expression, that's BS, isn't it? Because none of us were born recruitment consultants. I don't think any baby has ever been stamped on their backsides with a recruitment consultant for the future when they entered the earth. The truth is that all of us, in fact, the vast majority of us, somehow stumbled into recruitment because somebody saw something in us, or perhaps, we just happened to be in the right place or even the wrong place at the right time. So the fact is that it's just this point that you have to have recruitment experience or sales experience is a lot of nonsense. There's a much broader scope to this. And I think Joe's point's really valid, that, opening our thoughts and minds to the kind of people in terms of their traits, their innate ability to do well in our industry is very, very important, always has been important. And exploring those areas to see where we can bring people into our businesses that will add value, that will enjoy their careers, develop their careers with us is, I think, vital. I think it's a brilliant point. There's not a day that goes by presently where I'm not involved in conversations about where do I find people for my business. I think people listening to this need to take Joe's advice very strongly on board. I think there's some great point there.
Okay. If anybody doesn't have anything more to add at this point, what I'd like to do is actually just change the conversation slightly and talk about what the blockers are. So we all know what the right thing to do is, and I would hazard a guess that most of the people listening know what the right thing is, but what are the blockers to people moving this agenda forward and getting the benefit of all of the advantages that we're talking about in terms of moving DE&I agendas up, up our strategic agendas? Joe, I think you would like to start.
Yeah. I
there.
think the key blocker is getting the people with the power and the privilege in the room and having the conversations. So, for example, racism is not a black problem, it's a white problem. Sexism is not a female problem, it's a male problem. And I often challenge people to say, in order to make progress on these structural inequity social constructs, we need the people who hold the power to enable the change. Because what happens is the power and privilege barricade themselves in the castle. And when I want change, I'm seen as trying to storm the castle, trying to impact what people have, feel they're going to lose something, take something away by giving it to others. So what we need to do is find a way of lowering the drawbridge putting up a table and chairs and having a conversation about how we make change. And I mean, just for example, I'm just looking down the attendees list today, and just a quick scroll up and down. Most of the people on this call appear from their name to be female. Is that the problem? We're not getting men, white men, in the room to have the conversation to make the change. Because I can sit here as a trans woman and bang on all day around inclusion for LGBT, inclusion for women, inclusion for this. But unless a man hears me, nothing happens. And in the same way that when women got the vote 100 or so years ago, men allowed women to vote. And I always make this point, men allowed women to vote. It sounds awful to say it in that terms, but men were in Parliament, men had the vote, men had the power, men had the privilege. So we have to get the people incumbent to enable the change. And we don't do that by storming the castle, threatening and putting people into that position. We have to have conversations. But that means that everybody has to come to the table to create that change. So the blocker for me is trying to create the dialogue and the language and the momentum to get people who hold that power to want to sit at the table to create the change. And that's the challenge in organizations. As a recruitment leader, you have to be part of that change.
I think that's really interesting, Joanne, and I think it will nicely lead us into the conversation we're planning for next week, because one of the things that when we had clients on our webinar before, what they were saying is that they wanted our recruitment businesses to be their partner, to help them with their agenda, to help them move this forward. And so next week we're gonna talk at length, I hope, about how we as recruiters have the ability to influence our clients and to work with them to make that change, to influence the people who ultimately make the decisions, because the hiring decisions aren't made by recruiters, they're made by our clients. So I think that's a really, really interesting and valid point.
I was on a panel in San Francisco with Smart Recruiters, the ATS provider, and Hung Lee was chairing the panel. It was around gender equality in the workforce. And I looked out into the audience, and there were 600 people in the audience, and I couldn't count more than half a dozen men in the entire audience. So all the men had gone to the other stage. The men weren't interested in talking about gender equality. The men weren't interested in making change. So that's, for me, the blocker. And that's where we've got to go. And you say, we're going to cover that in the future. But yeah, that's where we've got to get change.
We have an interesting question from the audience that I would like to just to bring up if we can. And that's Spencer, who's asking, how come recruitment agencies do not have accessibility statements from their website for people with disabilities applying for jobs? There are disadvantaged, disabled and homeless people out there without qualifications or a degree, and they're struggling to apply for jobs online because of AI. So what's your view on AI and how that impacts on the DE&I agenda, and what's our view on that? Jackie, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, AI, I have mixed feelings about AI. Because I think in principle, AI should be a very helpful tool. It should help mitigate bias. It should help us be more blind, as it were, when we are selecting. The challenge with AI is who programmed it. And, some of you might have seen Coded Bias, which was a great documentary on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. And it talked about how certain facial recognition systems just didn't recognize Black faces, or they misidentified non-white faces and so forth. So in terms of AI, I would say be careful with that. In terms of the disability side of things, well, there are, I believe, over 1 million disabled people in this country. 90% of those have disabilities that are not immediately apparent. We sometimes call them invisible or less visible. And it may well be that people in organisations already have quite a percentage of people with disabilities, living with disabilities already. So I think really the way to look at embedding these kind of practices moving forward is to almost make the change before you need it, if that makes sense, or focus on making the change before you think you will need it. Being proactive in this space, it is huge, and I think we all agree on that. Joe's point about people not even wanting to start the conversation in many ways goes back to, I think, my earlier point about this fear of not knowing and this perception of I don't want to be seen to be weak and so forth. So I think my thoughts would be, get some advice, develop your understanding across disability and all areas of diversity and inclusion, and start to think about the small steps that you can put into practice that are proactive before you may necessarily think you need them. That's how you start to trailblaze. That's how you start to become leaders in this field, and how you start to appear to be more action focused and truly committed, as opposed to perhaps performative.
Can I add onto that?
Please, Joe.
In the same way that we were talking earlier about culture has got to be the starting point for inclusion and diversity, accessibility has to be the starting point, as accessible by default. And where do I mean when we start? I'm talking about your employer branding. I'm talking about your recruitment marketing. I'm talking about your first contact. If you are putting out a job role as an agency, if the people don't even know that job exists because you're pushing it into a different pond than they're swimming in, how are they ever going to find out? We talked about this, without getting political, about the government awarding contracts that people didn't even know that there was even a room to talk about the contract, let alone be in the right room. So how can people with disability, people who may be neurodiverse, know how to be in the right room? So you've got to make sure that you're casting your brand, your marketing as wide as possible. Then you've got to eat your own dog food. You've got to test the accessibility of the process. Does it work for all? And you're obviously setting up microsites for people to apply through. Are you just saying, email me a CV? Who doesn't that work for? I always ask the question, who is this not going to work for? And then ask people. So you're a person with a certain disability, maybe a visual impairment, hearing impairment, whatever it is. Tell me, does my process work? And there are consultants, there are people out there you can pay to do this accessibility review of your process. That's how you know it's accessible. So don't just think, no. And there are ATSs out there. I don't know if as agencies whether you use ATSs or just use Bullhorn or whatever it may be, but products like Resumo, if you come across them, they allow you to apply in multiple different ways, with audio, with video, with this. Think about creating questions rather than requiring a CV. De-invent the CV. We invented it with the fax machine 30, 40 years ago. Let's de-invent the CV, find different ways of applying. So, but also recognize that some people don't want to write a book. They can't write a book when they're applying, and that could be another barrier. So everything you think is being inclusive could actually exclude somebody else. You also need lots of multiple touch points and lots of different ways to apply, and then test the market. And if we're not managing our pipeline, seeing who's going into the funnel and understanding who isn't in the funnel, then we're never going to know whether it's working. And you can always talk to your candidates. Did this work for you? Don't just say you haven't got the job. Say, we're really sorry in this case you didn't do, but did the process work for you? Ask that question. Don't be scared. Ask people the way through the process. Is this working? Are we keeping you informed? Text messages don't work for everybody.
That's great. Thank you very much, both of you, for that. Paul, I know you're itching to ask a data question, but we are really going to run out of time, and we've literally got 2 minutes and we're going to run out of time. So I would like to ask our guests just for some final closing thoughts on, for the recruitment leaders listening to this, what are the things that you would like them to take away and think about actions for them to go and do now in their business, in their organizations? Joanne, do you want to go first?
I think start with that question. I don't know where to start, right? You started. You've thought about it. It's on the agenda. Put it on the board agenda for next time. What could we be doing? Think about accessibility by default. Think about culture as the starting point. So I think get it onto your board agenda. Start doing gap analysis. Start finding subject matter experts that can help you on this journey. Involve your people. I think one of the biggest barriers we often do is we don't listen to our staff. We've often got great opinions and great thoughts, and just say, this is our challenge. We want to become this. This is our vision of how we want to become. where do you think we need to work on it? And I'm sure your people will already tell you, yeah, we're pretty good at this, not so good at this, and then you can do that. So I think listen, ask, and actually decide to make change is a good place.
Thank you. Jackie, some final words from you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And all of that, first of all. So I think, to build on that, just final words, really understand what diversity, equity and inclusion means in your business. What does it mean? How do you want it to show up? And how does it help support our values rather than just be a separate thing? Diversity, equity and inclusion should be your business priority alongside other things, not instead of, or, not sort of once we've done that bit. As I mentioned before, commit to the E and the I of DEI, probably first, to be fair, as we were saying, and know that the diversity piece will come. And I think there's lots of things I could say, but in the interest of time, I will end by saying, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Be clear and open and vulnerable and courageous enough, to quote Brené Brown, to say, I don't know the answer. Know that we know about the Kubler-Ross change curve. This is a curve that we're working through. We've had early adopters in this space, and we're now coming into a space where if you're not getting on board soon with this, not only will it have a detrimental impact on your business, but on society at large. And that could mean someone in your own family. So get clear with being comfortable on what you don't know, and then start taking steps to understand and develop.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. I can't tell you. We've come to the 45 minutes flies always when we do these webinars, but honestly today it's flown even more than usual, and I have so much enjoyed listening to you all talk about the subject I know we all feel very passionately about. So next week, as Paul has put in the chat for us, we are going to be talking about the relationship we have with our clients and how we can meet the need that our clients are telling us about, which is help us on this journey, help us address these issues. And we're going to talk about how we can work with our partners on their DE&I agenda, and how we can become an influencer with those. So thank you very much indeed for your time. I hope you've enjoyed being with us. We've very much enjoyed having you. And of course, we will see you on future webinars as well, because you've both very graciously agreed to come and join us on future webinars too. And we also have Neil Carberry on one of the future webinars too. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.